Hello, my name's Charles, and welcome to the Okisolo YouTube channel. So, I'm gonna be honest, my original plan for my first real video was on what are like common mistakes that local fish stores make. And I wanted to get really clinical about it, like looking at market data, XYZ. And while I was working on that script, I kept having these like little like blurbs slip out. And so I realized that at some point that I really like deep down wanted to flesh out those blurbs because even though it was like more emotive than educational, I thought that maybe those blurbs could be insightful in many ways. So I took the time and I fleshed them out, and I had to pull together several different threads, but I think I have something to say about the matter. I also think it'll do a lot to explain to a lot of people what my motivations behind leaving the podcast and what I'm doing now and what are my motivations going forward. So I invite everyone to sit down, pour yourself a drink, and let's have a conversation about how hustle culture is ruining your hobby. I'm going to hold up my laptop for this one because there's a quote in the middle of this that is pretty long and very specific, and I pulled it from a specific citation that'll pop up on the screen. So if you can't tell, I'm American, and I mention it because late stage capitalism, I have to imagine, is affecting us in specific ways that may or may not be applicable to other parts of the world. So to be clear, this isn't a like capitalism is bad video. That's not really the realm of what I want to do. And to be honest, I think that kind of statement is a little too vague to provide anything meaningful to the conversation around the economic climate here in America. Instead, and here's that quote, try something specific like markets lacking robust antitrust enforcement aren't favorable for the average consumer due to the propensity of collusionary behavior and mergers reducing competition. I merely want to highlight specific facets of hustle culture and American culture and how they are applicable to how I went from hobbyist to professional and back into the space of being a hobbyist again. The hustle has become so ubiquitous here in the States that like it doesn't really register on a radar anymore. So like, have you ever felt guilty for taking your like designated break? Or have you ever like put in all for like weeks or even months and then you realize that's like not sustainable? So you like peel back a little bit to try and like give yourself like some wiggle room, and then you feel guilty for doing that. Uh, have you ever like felt the need to respond to a work email while you're on vacation? These are all symptoms of like American like hustle culture and the need to like just keep going. This mentality is constantly reinforced and like conditioned, so it becomes really normalized here. And I want to be very clear that like normal doesn't mean healthy. Not giving yourself the space for downtime is actually dangerous. Yamauchi et al. Went as far as to say that long working hours have a substantial detrimental effect on the safety of workers. Specifically, they found that like workplace injuries are most frequently found in people who work long hours, which, if I'm remembering the paper correctly, they defined as working like 50 hours or more a week. But like work doesn't necessarily mean the time that you're at work. It also means like the time that you're not spending on leisure. All of that to say that like machines don't function at 100% all the time, and pretending that we're capable of doing that is both a service to ourselves and the workplace in which we are in. We're really terrible at turning off the like hustle culture idea in our brain to the point that like we start bringing that into our hobbies. So you start thinking of ways to like, how do I make my hobby productive? Or like, why not turn it into a side hustle? Or like you start processing how expensive your hobby is, and you're like, man, wouldn't it be nice if this hobby like paid for itself. And like, then you take it a step further and you're like, what if this was my career? Like, what if my hobby was my career? And like, there's this idea and that like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day of your life. But like, there's a major flaw being ignored here, and that's because like, it's a trap. Like, being a professional is about being a professional. And that doesn't just mean you're like in the workplace of your profession or doing something in your profession. That also means like being serious, which like by definition is the exact opposite of having fun. So I like found myself working really hard to try and make my home projects distinct from my work projects when I was an professional aquarist. And I was onto something there, but we'll come back to that. Just like put a little thumbtack in that and we'll come back to that. Because I really didn't start understanding where I was coming from with all this until I was introduced to self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is a framework in psychological research that was developed to explain what motivates humans to do things. Within this framework, sources are typically defined as either extrinsic, oh my goodness, extrinsic or intrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is like internal motivation, like your desire to do something because you want to do it. And then external motivation is when extrinsic motivation is external motivation. Good Freudian slip there. Because, and that would be things like, I'm doing this thing because my job requires me to, and if I don't do my job, I don't get paid. So generally in self-determination theory, you would prefer people to be intrinsically motivated because they tend towards being more consistent in performing the behavior than they would be if they're externally motivated. So then that raises the question of like, how do you foster internal motivation? In theory, see what I did there? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You have three basic psychological needs that need to be met in order for intrinsic motivation to thrive. Autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is the psychological need to feel like you are in control and capable of making choices without external input. Think about like reading a book in your spare time versus reading it for a class. Like reading a book can be really fun, but like when the reason for why you're like doing it is externally motivated, it suddenly becomes a chore and it's just really, really annoying to do. Something analogous happened to me when if you found yourself in the shoes that I was in, where like I had been doing aquarium keeping for about 20 years as a hobby, and suddenly I was doing it professionally. And it's a really attractive idea until you realize that you no longer have any autonomy in it. So like you have to have that conversation with that person about why the advice that their favorite YouTuber is giving them is going to kill their fish. And you have to learn about things that you didn't have any interest in so that you can have that conversation with that person about why this fish will die in this specific situation. If that hasn't scared you off yet, imagine you've gone all in and you're a small business owner. And now, like, you don't work, you don't get paid, so you don't have time off. And so then the logical question you have is like, why don't I hire people? But then that's like changing the equation, but not in the way you think, because now not only do you need to make enough profit for bills, you need to make enough profit to pay those people, and those people are depending on you to succeed. And that is a like specific type of stress that is really hard to articulate. People who've never experienced it, like every slow day you'll start fretting over like whether or not you're going to be able to pay Janet this week. And like if you can't handle that pressure, like then don't do it. And if that pressure doesn't scare you at all, then you're the wrong person to be a business owner who's employing other people. And I'm adamant on that. But you know, moving on. The next one is competence. So competence is probably the hardest one for me to articulate to other people, and I really don't know why, but it's just this like desire to feel like you know what you're doing. And like in a general sense, I think we all kind of understand how that feels. Like we've all gone out of our way to try something new and then like completely whiffed it. And we were so embarrassed that like we never wanted to do that thing again. And like extra cringe and embarrassment is like stacked on top of it if someone points out that you whiffed it, to the point where you'll start avoiding trying that thing a second time. It's really crazy how quickly you can be motivated to not do something just from feeling like you're incapable or an idiot. This behavior of avoiding new things or fear of trying new things is actually really well well documented in people who are neurodivergent, because they've often experienced a lifetime of authority figures giving them negative feedback for not behaving properly. And this results in like low self-esteem. And what's really weird about it is it can create this like feedback loop where they usually like lack the trust in their own decision making, creating like unconscious reliance on external influences or external validation, often in the form of they like try to form like structures, or like they try to they get attached to specific individuals, and they go to these people and talk to them and like try to gauge their responses before they make their own decisions. I think in the podcast I've talked about enough about my mental health struggles, and so I'm not going to call too much attention to it here. I feel like throughout the course of like this YouTube channel, you get snippets of it and you'll start figuring it out. But that was important to me. Like, and another one is the so I'm just going to move on to the next point. But the idea of like relatedness is really important too, and that's the psychological need to feel like you belong. I've seen this one also called connection or belongingness, but that seems to be less common in the literature. I think this one is fairly straightforward. We all, for varying reasons, struggle with the feeling that we don't belong. Like we've all had that like imposter syndrome. And that desire for relatedness is why like no one is immune to cults. Cults target people who are lonely and alienated and give them a space that feels like they belong. And sorry, there's a window right here, and there's people like playing with their dog, and it's really cute but very distracting. So check out that citation if you've ever been curious about how anyone could be stupid enough to join a cult. They're not stupid. They needed to feel like they belonged somewhere, and we all do to varying extents. So like just extend a little bit of sympathy there. So how do we take this information and make it useful? Like take a second and just indulge me here and close your eyes and give yourself take a deep breath. I think everyone needs to be kinder to themselves, not just about aquarium keeping, but about everything. Stop comparing yourself to other people because you're not in competition with them. The only person you're trying to be better in is the person that you used to be. So let's narrow this back down to the scope of aquarium keeping. So being a hobbyist. In our honors thesis, again, I have more notes. In our honors thesis, Emily Absher argues that part of the reason we're all concerned with finding careers we're passionate about is because we don't have healthy relationships with our workplaces. And I have to say that I've come to that conclusion as well. Remember what I said about coming back to talking about my workplace projects and home projects being distinct from each other. So I just wasn't in control at Watercolors. Don't get me wrong, I loved working there. And I don't regret it, and I sometimes miss it, but I didn't get to choose what projects I did, and like the decisions I made were entirely dictated by the market. Like, oh, you love wild betta? Well, too bad, it's not profitable, and that wears away at you, and it just does. And like something that I started thinking about a lot was we had a recording session about a year ago where Ben, Amy, and I were talking, and Ben said, and I ended up writing it down in the moment. So Ben's the owner of Watercolors, we spend a lot of time taking care of fish, and I still love it. I just don't want to do it when I get home. And that really stuck with me because I was like, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a hobby, doesn't it? Um, so I didn't get to have a space where my hobby was just that. Like, I think we all need to take a step back and recognize the value of having a space that just exists to be fun. Your aquarium can be whatever you want it to be, and you don't need to justify that to anyone but you. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Don't do it for money. Don't do it for the approval of your peers. Do it because it makes you happy. Keeping Fish Simple has an amazing series on breeding zebra plecos that really captures that vibe of doing it merely because you enjoy it. I don't like plecos that much, but his enthusiasm is so infectious that I was sorely tempted to try breeding a pleco species for myself for a while. In the spirit of only justifying our projects to ourselves, I've grown fairly secretive with my projects. I used to give constant updates on the Watercolors Aquarium Daily podcast, and people started really looking forward to these. And because there was this weird dynamic of you're an authority figure, there's this weird pressure of you're going to succeed, and that creates a lot of pressure. And there was this Lowell's Fish Lab shop talk video where he said no one was allowed to be disappointed if trying to breed Epistogramma elizabethae doesn't work out for him. And I really empathize with that. I think the only reason I'd share my home projects is if I think doing so would be particularly informative. And that's not to say that I don't have plans to share produce videos around my projects. I definitely do. They would just need to be a specific purpose behind them and be very intentful. Until then, these projects are there for my own enjoyment and no one else's. If you're looking to add a sense of competence and belonging to your hobby, I think I have the perfect suggestion. Specialize. Specialize. Breed a rare or endangered species. Breed something entirely ubiquitous. Celestial pearl daniels would be right in the spirit of what I'm going for here. And you breed the best strain of celestial pearl daniels that anyone's ever seen. Learn to aquascape your tank in a way that makes your home more beautiful. In my experience, people gravitate towards a specialist. Why shouldn't they? You know that thing more than anyone else does. The aquarium industry is so trendy now. Something of high value will come along, everyone starts breeding it, and then the price drops, then everyone stops breeding it because it's not profitable anymore, and then everyone stops breeding it, and then poof, it's gone. Just poof. And longtime clubbies, each one of them has a story of something really cool that they just everyone had for a while, and then they just cannot find anymore. And the local aquarium club here, the one that everyone seems to lament, is about 15 years ago, there was a strain of Beta ocellata that just bred like crazy without any difficulty. And I think one guy even got a pair to spawn in one of his cichlid tanks, like an African, a Rift Lake cichlid tank. And every strain of Unimaculata or Ocellata that's come into the hobby since then has been very different, a little bit less frisky, shall we say. I think this is really unfortunate though, because it means that proper maintenance on species and strains just isn't happening anymore. So probably the craziest example to me, so RA, the world's oldest marine ornamental aquaculture facility, doesn't breed Bengali cardinal fish anymore. And that's crazy to me. They used to be one of the most common and popular fish in the saltwater hobby, and we can't trust ornamental aquaculture facilities to maintain that fish we know and love. They only do it because of money. So they're at the whims of the market. Said another way, we either need to be willing to pay more for our fish, or we need hobbyists to maintain stable populations, no matter how common or rare they are. And so that doesn't matter what you specialize in. Specialize in what you love best. We need you, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As for me, this channel is not my job. As such, I don't currently have a planned release schedule. Producing more content is heavily incentivized on YouTube, but quickly made content is not necessarily well researched. Reactionary content is definitely what performs best in the current social media ecosystem. social media algorithms feed us toxic echo chambers because that's what we most readily engage with. So that's on us. We've become so preoccupied with the catharsis of being brutally honest that we've begun focusing more on being brutal than on just being honest. It's a feedback loop that I'd like to avoid myself. And I think the best way for me to avoid that is to be very intentful with my content, which takes time. Like you might have noticed, I'm still new to these long form scripts, so I'm definitely reading off a prompter in between cuts and tanks. And until I get better at doing this content, this is the reality of what I'm doing. So I'd like to give myself the space to learn and explore science communicating in a video format. I think scientists can learn from artists. They're often more in touch with their emotions. This is a personal opinion, but they're often more in touch with their emotions, making them better at making their audiences feel something. All too often, we scientists let ourselves get bogged down with dogma. The perception of scientists on an ivory tower may have some merit, and whether or not it's true or not, like the fact that people feel that way, it might as well be an ivory tower then. I'm constantly having these conversations with scientists who genuinely don't understand why science communication matters. Scientists become so focused on being right that we've lost the wonder of Carl Sagan and the fun of Bill Nye that made many of us fall in love with science in the first place. Every time I learn something new about the universe, it gets just more weird and wonderful than I thought it was possible. It makes me feel something, so it sticks with me. The Watercolors Aquarium Kelly podcast episodes I'm most proud of aren't the ones with the most views, but the ones that had the best stories. These stories stuck with people, and they walked away wanting to be part of the next chapter of that story. And I want to get better at doing that, like instilling that feeling in people. All that to say, I'm going to take my time, tell a good story, and hopefully I will learn something that will make me better at telling the next story. To those who've made it this far, I very much appreciate you. I'd love if you commented below with stories about when your hobby stopped being fun and how you overcame that. As I've stated many times in this video, my primary goal here is science communication. To that end, my future videos will be far more educational. Since this video included topics that are a little more out of my wheelhouse, or were mentioned in passing, I had to rely on secondary sources more than I'd like, things like honor theses, reviews, articles to cite my points. I prefer most of my videos be more focused, allowing me to predominantly feature primary literature as my citations. In fact, I'm planning on my next video being on how to read and find scientific papers to read for whatever topic you might be interested in reading on your own. If that sounds cool, hit the subscribe button so that you can see when that video comes out. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and give yourself permission to let your hobby just be there to have fun.